Yesterday, at 9:30 in the morning, a bell rang on the Nasdaq. And for the first time in history, ordinary people could buy a piece of SpaceX. The stock opened at $150. It hit $176 within the first hour. It closed at $160.95, up 19% on day one. And right now, today, millions of people are asking the same question. Should I buy now? The honest answer is, it depends entirely on something that almost nobody buying SPCX right now knows about. A date. A specific date, printed in the SpaceX prospectus months ago, that has blindsided retail investors in almost every major IPO in the last 20 years. And in the next 8 minutes, we're going to tell you exactly what that date is, what happens when it arrives, and the 3 moves that separate the investors who make money on SPCX from the ones who buy at the wrong moment and spend years waiting to break even. Stay right here, because this is the video most SpaceX investors are not going to find until it is too late. Let's be honest about what happened yesterday. SpaceX's IPO was genuinely historic. $75 billion raised, the largest IPO in history. A company that went from a private valuation of $350 billion 2 years ago to over $2 trillion on its first day of public trading. The excitement is real. The business is real. Starlink is profitable. The launch economics are unmatched. The defense contract pipeline is deep. But here is what nobody is saying loudly enough right now. The stock that closed at $160.95 yesterday is trading at 96 times last year's revenue. For a company that lost $4.28 billion in a single quarter, that does not mean the stock will go down. But it does mean that every dollar of future growth, every Starship mission, every Starlink subscriber, every government contract is already priced in. And then some. The people who make money buying IPOs on day one are almost never retail investors. They are institutions, hedge funds, early allocation holders who got in at $135 and are already sitting on a 19% gain. The question for you, buying today at $160, is completely different. And the answer hinges on something almost nobody is talking about. That date. Every time a company goes public, there is a lockup period. A legally binding restriction that prevents insiders, founders, employees, early investors, from selling their shares for a set period after the IPO. The flood of supply would crush the price before ordinary investors had a chance to buy. The lockup protects the IPO price. And then it expires. Here is SpaceX's specific lockup structure, and this is where it gets important. SpaceX built a staggered release schedule instead of one single lockup date. The first insider selling window opens after SpaceX reports its Q2 earnings, expected late July or early August 2026. At that point, up to 20% of eligible insider shares can be sold. An additional 10% unlocks if the stock is trading 30% above the IPO price of $135, which it already is. Then, at 70, 90, 105, 120, and 135 days after the IPO, additional tranches unlock on a rolling schedule through September, October, November, and December 2026. That date from the beginning of this video? It is not one date, it is 6. 6 separate windows, starting in late July, where insiders who bought SpaceX at a fraction of today's price can begin selling into the market. The lockup expiry date is printed in the prospectus months in advance, and retail investors get blindsided by it every single time. But here is the full picture, because this section would be misleading without the other side of it. There is a structural buying event coming that most SpaceX investors are not factoring in. Nasdaq amended its inclusion rules specifically for mega-cap IPOs in May 2026. SpaceX qualifies for Nasdaq 100 inclusion just 15 trading days after its June 12th listing. That date is approximately July 7th. What happens on July 7th? Every index fund and ETF that tracks the Nasdaq 100, every QQQ holder, every retirement account benchmarked to the Nasdaq is forced to buy SPCX automatically, regardless of price. This is a structural buying event, completely independent of whether SpaceX is a good or bad investment at the current price. Trillions of dollars in Nasdaq tracking funds will be mechanically buying SPCX in the weeks around July 7th. That forced demand, layered on top of genuine retail enthusiasm, could push the stock higher in the short term. And then, roughly 3 weeks later, the first insider selling window opens. Forced buyers pushing the price up, followed by insiders who have been waiting years to take profits, selling into that demand. This is the pattern that has played out in almost every major hyped IPO in the last 20 years. The stock runs on index inclusion, and then insiders sell into the run. Understanding the sequence is the difference between timing this well and learning an expensive lesson. Here is the honest framework. 3 moves, based on who you actually are, not a generic answer. Move 1. For people who already own SPCX from the IPO allocation. You are sitting on a 19% gain in 1 day. That is exceptional. If you believe in SpaceX as a 5 to 10-year investment, hold. The short-term volatility from insider selling does not change the long-term thesis if Starlink continues growing and Starship delivers. If you bought as a trade, take at least partial profits before the first insider selling window in late July. You do not have to sell everything, but locking in some of a 19% one-day gain before insiders can sell is not a bad idea. Move 2. For people thinking about buying SPCX today at $160. Wait. Not forever, just for one specific window. The highest probability entry point for a long-term SpaceX position is after the first major insider selling event, likely in August or September, when the stock has absorbed the selling pressure and found a more realistic trading range. Buying into a 19% post-IPO pop before insiders can sell is paying the maximum price at the maximum hype moment. Waiting 8 to 12 weeks and buying after the first lockup release historically gives better long-term entry points on hyped IPOs. Move 3, and this is the one most people will not think about. If you want SpaceX exposure without the IPO volatility, look at the proxy positions. EchoStar owns approximately 3% of SpaceX stock. Its shares jumped 11% on IPO day. AST Space Mobile jumped 12%. These are smaller, more volatile companies, but they give you indirect SpaceX exposure at prices that are not already reflecting a $2 trillion valuation baked in. For a small speculative position, the proxy play has historically outperformed buying the primary stock at peak IPO enthusiasm. SpaceX may be an extraordinary company. The IPO may have been the most exciting market event in years. But extraordinary companies can still be poor investments at the wrong price, at the wrong moment in the IPO cycle. Knowing the sequence, index inclusion, Insider selling windows, lockup release schedule does not make you pessimistic about SpaceX. It makes you a smarter investor than 90% of the people buying it right now.
Here is what you now know that most SPCX investors do not. SpaceX closed at $160.95 yesterday, up 19% from the $135 IPO price, in the largest IPO in history. Nasdaq 100 inclusion comes on approximately July 7th, forcing trillions in passive fund money to buy SPCX regardless of price. 3 weeks later, the first insider selling window opens. Up to 30% of eligible insider shares can hit the market. Rolling unlock dates continue through December 2026. 3 moves protect you. If you own it, decide whether this is a trade or an investment and act accordingly. If you are thinking about buying, wait for the post-insider selling entry point in August or September. And if you want exposure without the volatility, look at the proxy positions. The bell rang yesterday morning. What you do next determines which side of this trade you end up on. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening with SPCX, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week on First Million Club, we break down exactly these kinds of real money decisions with real numbers, before most people even know the questions to ask.